Hello, dear listeners. I'm Dakshin Adyanthaya, and in today's episode, we discuss a journey of what's sentimentalized as the keystone to introduce global impact with ideas and innovation. In simple terms, I'm just referring to entrepreneurship. Being a proud entrepreneur myself, I can tell you it's a beautiful struggle which many desire to experience but only a few initiate. Like Walt Disney quoted, "All your dreams can come true if you have the courage to pursue them," and rightly so. But do you know the meaning of this widely spoken term? The etymology of entrepreneur apparently comes from a French verb,
entreprendre.
Thank you Google Translate, which means to begin something or to undertake something. And it is derived from a combination of two Latin words, entre and prendis.
Entreprendes.
And that's how it's pronounced. So now that we know what it means, let's extend the conversation to our guest today and understand the roadmap to becoming one. But before that,
this is the Deliberate Talks Weekly Podcast, powered by the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures. Tune in every week to learn something new about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. And now, over to the voice of your host, Dakshin Adyanthaya. Enjoy the show.
And coming back, in today's episode, we have someone all the way from Singapore. He comes with 11 years of experience in leading a digital marketing firm and advising more than 500 enterprises in the Asia Pacific market. Today, along with his co-founder, he has grown and scaled his agency Happy Marketer, leading into an acquisition with Dentsu Aegis Network and Merkle. He's also associated with INSEAD and Quest Ventures as a mentor to advise early-stage startups. When he's not working, you will find him in the clubs playing professional cricket or co-hosting an adorable Facebook live session with his son. Here's welcoming Prantik Mazumdar.
Thank you, Dakshin, firstly for having me. I think it's amazing that I don't think we've spent as much time as we would have liked to in real life, but thank you.
Pleasure is all mine, Prantik. Thank you. So quickly digging into your career graph stories and where it all began from. You have gone from an aspirational entrepreneur to becoming an inspiration to a lot of people. Keen on knowing where and when did this whole grooming process start for you?
As they say, right, I think what appears on press or social media kind of misses the downs more than the ups. So yeah, let me fill you in. I think so. I'm a Bengali. I was born in Kolkata, but never lived there. I grew up in Pune. We moved to Indonesia, did my high schooling from there. That was, again, a great perspective shaping, I think, when I look back, because that's the first time, I went to a co-ed school. In Pune, I was in St. Vincent's, which is a boys' school. Also, this was an international school. So there was a healthy mix of people from Indonesia, Japan, Korea, US, Philippines, etc. So now when I look back, I think that melting pot was a very interesting time just to kind of accept different perspectives, to just be open to ideas. I think that schooling phase definitely shaped a lot of what I have become today. And then I moved to Singapore in 2001, and I've been here for the last 19 years now. So I got an offer from NUS, the number one school in Singapore, as well as back then there was an NRI quota at IIT. So I got into IIT Kharagpur, the same school as my dad. So my dad was very excited. And I still remember that on my birthday in 2001, just when I turned 18, we were at this Indian restaurant in Jakarta. We were literally debating where to go. And I'm glad I finally chose NUS. I mean, IIT would have been extremely prestigious and great. But, I just felt that without going through the joint entrance and the rigor of that, of the Indian education system, I wouldn't have fared well. Now, not to say NUS isn't rigorous. It's just that it's a very different kind of education environment, probably closer to the American or Australian system than close to the Indian system. So NUS, 4 years, computer science, computer engineering, that was absolutely a fabulous experience, both from an academic perspective as well as co-curricular perspective. I think two things that I take away from NUS is, again, the fact that whilst I went for computer engineering, I think NUS gave me an opportunity to kind of explore other fields. Growing up, one thing that I regret is I never explored, or no one really guided me that, hey, you could have a career in law or journalism or marketing for that matter. It was very much a, one pony trick that, hey, engineering is the be all and end all. I don't blame anyone for it, not including myself. I guess just the exposure didn't exist. But when I came to NUS, whilst I was doing the formal major degree, they kind of told us that technically, if we had the time, we could enter any lecture theatre. So unlike Indian universities, a difference in foreign universities is that it's not like you're not part of a fixed class. You don't have a fixed schedule. It's very free and easy. You can attend. There is no compulsory attendance, good or bad. You can attend, not attend, up to you. But of course, you have tutorials, exams. You obviously got to pass those. So I started attending some courses from economics and arts and social sciences. And then in year 3, they started this program for which we were the guinea pig batch called Minor in Technopreneurship. So by year 3, I realized that I wasn't as good as bulk of the class when it came to hardcore coding and engineering. I loved computer science, I loved technology, but I realized I definitely wasn't as good as half the cohort. But this technopreneurship program, which was meant to encourage entrepreneurship in Singapore, I think that was a massive game changer in my life, as well as Rachit, my co-founder, eventually. Both of us kind of became part of that program, and we got an exposure to the world of new product development, marketing. Like, I think something I'm proud of when I look at my NUS life is, apart from the technopreneurship, it also forced me to apply for jobs in a very rigorous manner. So I realized that Singapore, very honestly, it does not value paper degrees. So you go to a college just for education. So unlike India, most universities have placements, day 0, day 1, day 2. Singapore has nothing of that sort. You have a career center, but boss, once you've finished your degree, you're on your own. So which is interesting. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best way, but it's interesting because, again, it pushes you to the corner. And I'm someone who believes that we learn the most when we are pushed to the edge. So my story goes, I applied desperately to about 160 companies. I got about 12 odd interviews. I landed 7 offers and finally chose one. Believe it or not, I started my career with the Singapore government, something again completely unplanned. And that theme has remained with me, right? So all through my life, I think nothing in my career, I would say, has been based on what I've planned. To the extent I think a few years ago, I've come to a stage where I don't plan beyond a year. So I started with the civil service, worked there for 3.5 years. After that, I joined a brand consulting firm, a B2B brand consulting firm called Strategy.com, and I was posted to India, back home in Pune, to be the country manager to set up their operations. That was a 2.5 years of, again, massive failure. A classic, if anyone wants a classic failure story of what not to do as a Singapore or a foreign company in India, happy to provide advice based on first-hand experience. And then, as you know, that's when I kind of moved into, after that failure, I wanted to come back to Singapore for personal reasons. And that's when I got a break into the world of digital at Pinstorm, the same company where you and I were colleagues. When Pinstorm, eventually when that kind of came to an end of the road, that's when my paths crossed again with Rachit, with whom I was always, great friends with socially. And Rachit's path was always entrepreneurial. After the NOC program, he never looked back. He was always a freelancer. He set up his own company. And then our paths crossed, and that's when we started Happy Marketer. That's my 20 years in Singapore and a bit of my childhood and a couple of failure stories on the professional front.
But yeah, a lot of people become entrepreneurs, Prantik, and it comes to a standstill of personal growth. The focus is completely on growing your own business. But you didn't stop at one. You went on to be associated as a business consultant, an investor, a mentor with various ventures. Tell me a little more about how did the decision of helping startups and being associated with, say, INSEAD, Quest, and now NUS build up?
To be honest, Dakshin, as Happy Marketer, that journey kickstarted. We just realized that how lucky we were to, if you look at the timing, we started just a year after the global financial crisis. Both Rachit and I guess, coming from middle class family backgrounds, we understand the importance of family and support structures, how important that is in our upbringing. B, I think having started the business post crisis and having started the business in Singapore, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, we just realized that, we couldn't do anything without the support of friends, family, business partners, the government support. I've obviously started my career in the Singapore government. That gave me the first preview as to how important, how well the government is run, literally like a corporate. They take the economy and the industry so seriously. So I think right from the early stages, we knew the value and importance of mentors, formal help and informal help. Also, I would say, I think a lot to do with our families and upbringing, where, both Rachit and my moms, they are teachers. The dads both happen to be from, engineers from IIT, and very similar backgrounds. And I think that family background of kind of always made us feel that we got to be there for people, whether for money or otherwise. I think that trait, I would say, was always there, that how do you kind of be there for other people. And I think that was also part of our leadership growth, because when you are running a company, of course initially you're just 2 people or 4 people, but as the company scales, I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned as leaders is, how to be there for people, how do we just be there to listen, not to tell, how do we as and when they come and ask for help, how do we guide, or sometimes how do we just get out of the way. So I think that skill set or that trait got developed very early, I would say right from our NUS, as well as right from my government days and right early days of Happy Marketer. So I think we always knew that wherever we achieve along the journey, we will help people. So today, of course, what you mentioned about my involvement with Quest Ventures, HealthX Capital, INSEAD, or even TIE, the entrepreneurship organization. Today, that's come to the forefront. But very honestly, even during our 10-year entrepreneurial journey with Happy Marketer, we were always, at least, Rachit and I, we would carve out some time every week, if not every fortnight, to just, help out a small business owner on, let's say, fixing their SEO, or helping them on their analytics, or if someone's looking for a job. And till date, I think we are very passionate that, especially in the job front, I'm very passionate because, like I told you, I've been through a very, after the failure or relative failure at NUS, I realized that, getting a job, for someone who comes from a middle class background where you're kind of nurtured in an environment that getting a job or a corporate career is the be all and end all. I know the pressures of that. So even today, I, carve out half a day of my 5-day week to talk to new graduates or career shifters or mothers coming back to work, or trailing spouses who are looking for roles, to just kind of listen to them, help them, guide. And sometimes it's just about listening and giving them confidence and, directing them in the right way. Because obviously I may not be able to give a job to everyone, but I can guide them. It's been part of our journey, to be very honest. And so today, of course, I think after the little success that we've had as an exit, I think today, like I said, we just have to continue the same spirit. And hence, once the Happy Marketer exit happened, of course, we are still both running the business, but we have a bit more time on our hands. So what we've decided is to do 2 things. One is to invest in startups, either directly as angel investors, which we have done, or through venture funds such as HealthX Capital and Quest Ventures, where the quality of deal flow and due diligence efforts are much better. So that's the investment front. And the other front is to kind of do advisory and mentorship. And that's where we are partnered with premier education institutes, INSEAD, which is the world's #1 business school. I'm an entrepreneur in residence there. TIE is an American body by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. So we mentor startups there, as well as recently as last week, Rachit and I have joined NUS Angel Ventures, similar to INSEAD, to kind of give back and be on advisory boards for startups. So I think the goal is definitely, it's always been there, but just that now we have more time and resources to kind of give back in a more structured manner.
Indeed. And I think mentorship is a privilege that today's generation can cohere to. Just that the opportunities may be needed to be bred earlier into our education system and in a little more prominent way. But then again, I get a lot of students and professionals asking me a question that bothers them a lot, which is about when is it a good time to take that leap of faith and start something of your own? And my answer would often be whenever you're ready. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm sure there's quite a lot of science and research around it, but I'll share my perspective. I honestly, like I said, I don't come from a business family. Generally, as you know, Bengalis are probably better suited as literary artists, poets, or intellectual thinkers. So it wasn't in my blood, so to speak. And of course, during my college days, thanks to the technopreneurship program, looking at Rachit and a few other seniors, it was always in my veins that hopefully someday I can give it a shot. But I similarly struggled with when is the right answer. So I've seen various answers. I'll tell you what, I've seen the different models. So one model says, some people do it during college or right after college. My eventual business partner, Rachit, fits that mold. So a lot of startups today come out right from college, which is great because university is a great time to take risks. So I think one model says earlier the better because less responsibility, you can devote more time, and you can leverage university R&D resources and take off from there. So you will see a lot of startups coming from there. Other model which says, no, let me do a couple of corporate jobs, let me do an MBA, let me build a network, and let me start. So that's the next batch you see typically post MBA. So in my interactions with INSEAD folks, I see a lot of startups coming up, post MBA, where people are probably around their early 30s. The third batch that I've seen, and I dare say research potentially shows that the third batch, contrary to popular belief, probably does financially much better. So this is basically people who start much later in their career, around mid 40s. I guess the pros are that you have a lot of rich corporate experience, maybe 20 years under your belt. You've built credibility. You have a good network. Maybe access to funding is much easier because of those reasons. But at the same time, your family responsibilities, time commitments may be difficult. So those are three, that's the spectrum that I've typically seen, right? My journey started probably somewhere in the middle of the first and two. I always wanted to pursue an MBA again, right? The similar typical thinking. But there came a point in my life where I decided that, and I still maintain that view. And I hope some of the listeners don't mind this a critical view, that I generally I don't see the value of an MBA degree anymore. In fact, I didn't see the value of an MBA degree 10 years ago. And I think Singapore had a lot to do with shaping that. So I think my view was, earlier my view was very simple, the typical path that I'll finish NUS, I'll work for 4-5 years, and then apply for a business school for an MBA degree. I somehow started believing or realizing that an MBA degree, takes away 2 years of your prime youth. You're probably going to be in 100K, if not more, worth of debt. And I somehow didn't see the value add in the Singapore context, because like I told you, Singapore genuinely does not believe or give as much economic value to a paper degree. In India, it's very different. In India, you do an MBA, immediately you might get a 2x, 3x jump. Your social value or your marriageable value increases. A lot of people take it from that perspective. But in Singapore, that's not the case. Now, coming back to your original question, where amongst those three, I started somewhere in the middle of Model 1 and Model 2, and it happened by chance. And I had two choices. I had a couple of final discussions with corporate careers at Facebook and LinkedIn, which were quite lucrative. And my conversation with Rachit, who said, hey, look, I'm already kind of doing this on my own. I would like to have a business partner like yourself who is doing this. I would say mine was an accidental entrepreneur, but I started at a low point of my personal life as well as a decent point in my corporate career after Pinstorm, where honestly I didn't have much to lose. So I don't think I took a huge risk. I think mine was a bit of a defensive structure where I said, you know what, I'm 28, life hasn't gone the way I really wanted to. And so, you know what, let's give this a shot. But I told myself, I'll give myself 3 years to fail. And if this doesn't work out, I backed myself that, I think I can get a corporate degree once again. That was a bit of a defensive structure that kind of molded my decision. But very honestly, right, after having done this for 10 years, it may sound like a cliche, but very honestly, my view is the answer is always now. If it's an itch, I would say go for it, because, the number of people that I've seen not starting because of analysis paralysis is just unbelievable. Because if you look at it mathematically, 8 or 9 out of 10 startups will anyway fail. So anyway, the logical odds are against you.
Right.
Now, you can try and minimize risk in various ways, but the reality is, if there's an itch to do something, if you have a half-baked idea, or if you have a decent partner that you think you can figure things out with, I would say give it a shot. I have not reached the mid-40s yet, hence I can say this, but I would rather start earlier than later. But I think you also got to judge firstly, what do you feel entrepreneurship is for you? I don't think it is for everyone, and I think that's absolutely fine. And of course, some people may ask me, hey, but if I don't have money, how can I do that? So hence, like I said, if you come from a well-to-do family and if you think your family can support you for 2 to 3 years, that's a good starting point. Or if you have saved up in your first 2-3 years, that's a good point. If you're a bit more risk loving, maybe you can take some loans from family or banks, etc. But really, really genuinely believe in the philosophy of now, that if your gut says it's a good time to give it a shot, I have a great idea, my advice to listeners is in the now. If you feel like it, if the gut says it's worth it, go for it.
Just taking that conversation from where you were contemplating offers from LinkedIn, Facebook, and Rachit, when a fancy 7-figure salary is offered to you, how do you not tempt yourself to go for a job and instead choose a journey where you know that you wouldn't have a stable income till the time you grow?
It is very difficult. And this is a really good conversation to have because, at that point in time, 28, after government, some private sector experience, suddenly you have a rocket ship opportunity. It's a hard conversation. And I know a lot of people, for right or wrong reasons, have chosen the corporate path. And again, right, if that's for you, fantastic, because these are great organizations. They pay well. It's great on your resume. So, absolutely great. The reason I decided to choose this path is because, I had a few conversations with some of my seniors and mentors. And I think I started getting perspective from them. So there was one bunch of people who said, see, you'll always get a chance to work in these big companies, but not every day that you get a chance where, a potential co-founder is offering you something, or there's a startup idea. So one was like it was more like, hey, give this a shot. If it fails, you can always get a Facebook or LinkedIn back. So that was one perspective from people who may have missed the boat, who are basically, I guess, long story short, they were telling me, don't become like me, try something different. That was one. And the other also is, again, could be a bit controversial, where, I was talking to a friend of mine who worked at Facebook. In fact, he's from an agency background and he joined there, sales background, joined there. And when I spoke to him, I said, dude, how is it going? It must be terrific. He said, you know what? It's obviously a fantastic place, great people to meet, free food. And, I'm very happy on the last day of the month. I said, oh, that's great. But what about the other days? He said, you know what? I'm not selling. I said, that's funny. You're doing well, you say, but you're not selling. He says, and he clarified my mind so well. He said, you know what? I'm not selling, but the sales is happening. I've just become an order taker. And that really clarified a huge thing for me, because that's when you realize that I started questioning that, hey, if I join a big firm like Facebook, LinkedIn, what's my value going to be really? Because the reality is, and again, this is not to dissuade anyone from joining any big company, but it is really about whether it resonates with you. To me, what really made me question is, hey, look, I'll be one of the tens of thousands of people there, and the reality is the company will do great with or without me. Mm-hmm. And that difference of being a salesperson and an order taker, I think that gave me a lot of clarity. He says, you know what, I don't have to sell. The deck is already made. People are buying Facebook ads anyway. I'm just going and presenting those and filling forms and getting the sales operations done. And no disrespect, right? That's a great job. It's a great company to learn, like any other big company. But I realize it's not for me, at least at that point. Right. And in sports analogy, I'm a big cricket fan. It's like, for a lack of a better analogy, you want to be a Kohli in your field. You want to be a Sachin in your field where you're scoring. You're making bulk of the runs or taking bulk of the wickets, and you want to be a match winner, right? That's the intention. So I think that's the lens I looked at it from. One was, hey, let's give this a shot. If it fails, I can always come back. B, I think the moment I had that conversation, I realized that it's more important in my youth not to earn the 6 or 7 figures. I genuinely still believe money follows. Money can't and should not be the sole goal. It is really about being in a place where you can create or drive impact.
Right then. Just taking notes from your 3 ages of entrepreneurship and extending it to a saying which says, no matter when you start your venture, unless you evolve frequently, you will never grow to the next level. Take you, for example. Over the years, you have moved from a sales role to a managing a business role to talking frequently about data and analytics in your keynotes. So what is your evolving process like? Do you read a lot of books, reports, watch a lot of videos, experiment with new tools, or frequently listen to podcasts? What do you really feed on?
If there is one thing that I think I find common amongst my entrepreneur friends, it's really this keenness to constantly learn every day. It's that humility, and it's a system that everyone creates either through their personal media habits, reading habits. And here is something, again, I'll tell you my current system, but before that as background, and I see, funnily, again, this is not planned, but both Rachit and I have very similar learning patterns. I think his is way more structured, and I learned a lot from him as well. But I think what I see, and I see this in various other entrepreneurs, and I can tell you, this is something even we look out for as employers, this is where school education comes in very handy. And this may sound a bit counterintuitive. I'm not referring to rote learning, but what I've seen is, during school education, I've started seeing patterns that, especially in your class 9 to 12, I try and quiz people about, what did they do in that class 9 to 12 period. Honestly, I don't care whether someone got into joint entrance, IIT, or aced their A-levels or whatever, but what did they read? Mm-hmm. Were they part of elocution or drama? Were they part of theater? Were they part of sports? I think that those 4-5 years, I think, plays a huge role in shaping. And I'm a big fan of people, who essentially explore various domains. So they don't have to be polymaths per se, where they're experts in every field, but they have explored different things. And I guess I'm a bit more biased towards people who speak well, who read well. And I think that comes through when people who have been through debating. It's not the fact that they can debate well, the fact that they can formulate an argument, the fact that they can formulate an argument from both sides, which also means they can critically analyze, which also means they can structure their thoughts and arguments. It also means they are able to speak publicly, especially if you have done debating and elocution. So a lot of skill sets that come through school period, through these extracurricular, matter a lot to me. And that's one. The other is your family environment. Does your family environment nurture the habits of reading or, cultural activities or sports activities? I was very fortunate. Both my parents are extremely culturally inclined. So now, whilst as a kid growing up, honestly, I still lament to my mom. I was just doing that yesterday. I hated the cultural interactions. They were always into Rabindra Sangeet and theatre, and very typical to any Bengali family. Back then, I hated it because all I wanted to do was play cricket. But today, when I look back, I realized the value of that was they were trying to expose me to different things, and then I decided to pick some and not pick some. But I think the values of constant learning or constantly exposing yourself to new things, I think that has stuck with me. So fast forward today, I think what we try, and Rachit and I have now formalized this system for the happy marketers, who we call the Happy Tribe, is what I like to call is to create a system for yourself by surrounding yourself with goodness. Now, what does this really mean? So it's a 7-step process, but it really begins by creating a system where you begin by consciously surrounding yourself by goodness. Now, what does goodness mean? Goodness is nothing but, in this case, surrounding yourself through very good newsletters, or structuring your Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn news feeds with stuff that you want to consciously read and be exposed to. So you can't leave it to chance, because if you leave it to chance, then the algorithms take over, and there's a bit of randomness. Again, nothing wrong with it, but I think once you've figured what you like, I generally kind of tell people. So, for example, you asked about my media habits. Like, I have a series of newsletters that I can't go without a week by, right? So if I follow, for example, Avinash Kaushik every Friday. His newsletter on analytics is my go-to. Every day I start 8:05 my day. I start by reading the summary from the Ken, both the India and the Southeast Asia version. I am a big fan of Scat Galloway's weekly newsletter that comes on a Friday or Saturday on Singapore time. In Southeast Asia, Tech in Asia, it's a paid platform like the Ken. That's my startup go-to place. On the more corporate analysis, both Rachit and I religiously read Financial Times, McKinsey Quarterly, the research from BCG, as well as Harvard Business Review, right? So we basically surround our inboxes as well as our social feeds with podcasts. Again, on podcasts, I'm a big fan of Adam Grant, as well as Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway on their podcast called Pivot. So, whether it's podcasts, whether it's TED Talks on video, whether it's your social feed, one is, how do I surround myself with goodness so that I'm exposed to things that I want in a structured, conscious way? But then it can't stop there, because I'm a big believer that humans by nature are very lazy, and we are more consumers, bigger consumers than creators. We got to actively have a system that forces us to create at least as much as we consume, if not create more than we consume. So if you just look at your friends and your network, chances are everyone's consuming Netflix and podcasts and watching content. But you will find very few people like yourself take the active route of also creating content. So what we try and do for ourselves and the Happy Tribe is, when you consume something about a particular topic or category, we urge and encourage everyone to firstly form your own independent, original, incisive point of view.
Interesting.
And it has to be put onto paper. So either you share that internally on your internal Slack chats or internal chatters, or ideally put it out there on LinkedIn. So ideally, and encourage everyone that when you read, let's say 3-4 articles, or you listen to a podcast about, let's say, a topic like, let's say, attribution modeling in digital, formulate your original point of view, criticize the articles, just like the way you would do back in class 11, 12 in your critical analysis papers, and put that out on LinkedIn with your original point of view. A lot of people, if you see, they just very lazily hit the share button without sharing their point of view. that's wrong, because when you're not sharing your point of view, you're missing out. You're not building your personal brand. You're not sharing what's in your mind, and you're not crystallizing your narrative. So that's the system that today, over time, we have formalized. Is we surround ourselves by goodness, then we encourage ourselves to kind of share that point of view, right or wrong, by substantiating those with facts and arguments on LinkedIn, through blogs, through videos. And eventually, Rachit and I have gained a lot of experience, exposure, and value by being keynote speakers and trainers. In fact, I picked up the art of training from Rachit. He went through Toastmasters. So Rachit, unlike me, he's a way more structured person, and he went through training programs to become trainer. How do you facilitate better? How do you train better? What kind of games can you play as icebreakers? How do you elicit response from people? It doesn't happen automatically. So there's a lot of thought, structure, and process around it. So you read, you opine, you share, then you speak and you train. That's the model it's a rinse repeat loop model. We do it constantly. So now it's become a habit. But it's a very good point that you say that people think education finishes at college or MBA, but honestly, that's when your education starts.
True.
And that's a mindset we all need to build. And one of my personal favorites is, what's going to differentiate us in our generation, especially if we have to live for 80, 100 years, is the ability to be humble, to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And unless we do that, it's very easy to to stagnate and get lost in this whole fast-moving world.
Interesting that you highlighted the lazy content patterns. I think the mindset often is driven by fear. The fear of being judged or the fear of criticism, while the latter is a mindset that one needs to practice. What are your thoughts on the fear of being judged? Especially an entrepreneur gets criticized a lot for his or her idea. How does one not get affected by opinions?
I think, again, I would go back and draw my experience from it's the early school days and the failure experience at college and my role at Strategy.com in India. And honestly, you kind of start, growing a thick skin. And I think that's very important as an entrepreneur when you look back, that I think the reason these extracurricular activities are so important is because they bring you in front of people. They force you to, they kind of force you to put yourself on the line. And over time, it doesn't happen overnight. And maybe some people are born with it. For me, I wasn't really born with it. Right from a childhood experience where, my mom asked me to recite a Bengali poem on stage, which I knew absolutely by heart. But when I went on stage, I completely forgot. Right? That was very early. I was very embarrassed, to a point when, in a school debate, again, I did not win, to the point of the college failure, etc. And of course, along with a lot of success at the school and college level, I think it's going through that phase is very critical, because that molds and shapes you to have a thick skin. And I think as an entrepreneur, apart from that learning thing we spoke about, the other thing that's very critical is having and growing that thick skin, because like I said, by sheer nature or by maths, one is going to face more failures than successes. In fact, again, alluding to the cricket analogy, I think from Rahul Dravid's book, I think he kind of tells you that, cricket is more about failure than successes. In fact, analyzed his own test innings, and he'll say there are more failures than successes. But as long as, overall the impact is positive, and, you're classified as a good player. So I think during that phase, as you learn to kind of grow that thick skin and ensure that, it doesn't phase you, it's very important. Because as an entrepreneur, you will be doing yourself a disservice if you can't put yourself on the line. You have to be the ability to kind of constantly put yourself out there, get opinions, get thrashed, because you will anyway, whether you like it or not. So, and I kind of started this, in the first 3-4 years of sales, you just realize that 7 or 8 of the conversations were a no. And it's really about formulating that habit here. So in those periods as a salesperson as well, and I guess you start to become very resilient. And I think the digital platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook allow you to kind of, build this habit. So today it's habit that every day I would share a couple of posts, my point of view. As long as you do it in a decent way, you don't put down people, and you kind of, you're forced to argue based on merit and facts, you start building that muscle memory. So you're absolutely right that along with learning and just consumption-based learning is not enough. You got to be able to voice your opinion. You got to be able to share your ideas, and you have to be open to criticism, because that's the nature of the game. Otherwise, you'll never succeed.
Makes sense. So from a closing conversation point of view, Prantik, if you had to quickly give 5 starting tips for budding entrepreneurs, what would they be?
One is going to be around people and especially co-founding teams. I think something that doesn't get much attention. Again, I can only speak from my experience. I have been absolutely lucky to have a business partner in Rachit. There was another partner in David in the early days, but we parted ways. So I think one is that I think if I was to do this again, I would always do it with 2 or 3, in total, 1 more or 2 more partners. So I think a 2 or a 3 founding member team is quite good. And there, I think what matters is, your values have to be same or similar, but your skill sets have to be complementary. It's very important. It's important not to have the same skill sets, but the values and the vision and the direction have to be aligned. So that's one, about getting good partners and co-founders. The other is, I think, being clear about the problem that you want to solve and being okay that, look, you know the problem you want to solve, but you have to be very flexible in the ways you go about solving it. I think in the early days, if you're very rigid about, oh man, this is the best idea in the world, and being very egotistic about it, I think that can hamper you more than it can really help you. So I would say that be very clear about the problem you want to solve, but be flexible around the ways that you go about doing it. Because, whether it's market driven, whether it's partner driven, whether it's economics driven, I think it's very critical to be flexible, because markets or your partners may force you to pivot or change. Third is prudence. Yeah, I think I know in the at least in the 2 decades I have lived through as a student, as a professional. This is the era where the valuation game has become very prominent. Of course, we've had 2-3 cycles where the valuation game has been thwarted. The dot-com bust, the 2008-2009 crisis, and even now, where companies without profit suddenly are out of business all of a sudden. Again, having come from a service business, we had no choice but to be prudent and keep an eye on profits right from month one. I would still say that even if you're a product business, yes, you may not be able to be profitable right from day one, but be prudent. Whether you raise funds or don't raise funds, I think being prudent or having a path to profitability, I think is very critical. Ideally, be profitable as early as you can, especially if you're a service business, be profitable right away. But if you're a product business, have a very nuanced, measured view as to what's the path to profitability. Because otherwise, in your early days, if you're not prudent, it gets very difficult to kind of bring in that discipline and habit later on. That would be my third advice. Fourth, I think, is about, I think we touched upon, so I won't go deeper, but it's this element about learning. I think it is so critical to constantly learn, unlearn, relearn, with the objective, learning consciously around things that help you in your entrepreneurial life. So it's not just about the tech, it's not just about finance, it could be about people, it could be about culture, it could be about stakeholder management, right? As an entrepreneur, you have to learn, because your school and college degrees don't teach you these things. So you got to be able to learn, and learning doesn't mean just degrees. It means, to me, the fastest or the best way that I've learned is by talking to people, talking to other people who have been there, done that, or talking to other people who have failed. And the fifth, honestly, is you can't do it yourself. Hence, it's a matter of people, the right team, and more than the right team, it's the culture that glues the team. Again, it's a topic that's obviously been spoken about a lot. To me, whatever little success we've had or enjoyed as a happy marketer, I think it's all to do with the culture at the Happy Tribe. And as leaders, you've got to be able to set culture right in the early days, because that's what percolates as your team grows. And when I talk about culture, the only thing that I will say is, culture is binary. You are either in it or you're not in it. So when you're interviewing or when you're speaking to your candidates or your team members, you will immediately know whether someone's in or out. And you've got to make that hard choice. I would any day pick someone who is in my culture but doesn't have the right skill set, and not the other way around. And I think one thing that we learned in building our culture is we wanted what's called active citizens as opposed to passive residents. Subtle difference there, right? It holds true for countries, it holds true for companies, your cities, as well as your condominiums. Is you want people who are going to put up their hands, you're going to take initiative, you're going to take action, as opposed to who's just there for a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
So I think these 5 points about finding good partners or co-founders, being flexible on the direction and the way. I think, being prudent when it comes to financial management or having a path to profitability, being very open and humble to learning from other people, whether successful or failure stories. And lastly, focusing on your culture. I think these are 5 things I would live by.
Super.
Friend us on your socials and let's connect.
Just before we get done here, I'm going to pick up one random question from the internet universe. So for the curious mind out there who inquires, I have a great startup idea. I want the money to start it, but I won't tell anyone the idea till I get the money. What's your suggestion for him, Prantik?
I think all I will respond to that by saying, don't be cagey about your idea, because remember the dialogue from the Facebook. If you have made the Facebook, you have made the Facebook. So people give too much weightage to an idea and trying to keep it a secret. I would just say, go build it, go work on it.
Brilliant. So that's it. When this has genuinely been a great productive conversation, Prantik. I'm so glad to have you on my show. And I wish you all the success and more stories to follow in the near future. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for always keeping in touch. And it's great to see you shine and succeed as an entrepreneur. And, like when I think about your life, all the great stuff that you do on the social side, your street plays, etc. I mean, they speak a lot of volumes about your character, about the training programs you're running. It's amazing. Keep up that energy, keep up that passion and initiative. That's what matters. So thank you so much and wish you all the best. And thanks to everyone who's listening. I'm obviously always open to taking any questions. Reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn.
Thank you so much for coming in. And that's the end of today's episode. You can share all your feedback at deliberatetalks@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to follow the Deliberate Talks and the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures on social media for episode follow-ups and updates. Join in next week for another episode. Till then, inspire and be inspired.